All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Told that we're now live on the stream and audio, so hello to everybody at home as well, especially Councillor Watkins, who I'm sure is paying rapt attention this evening. There's no fire alarm planned for this evening, so should the alarm sound, please leave via the nearest available emergency exit. Closest exit through the glass door behind you to my left and through the double doors on the riverside behind you. Please muster at Tower House Car Park. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of the meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being minuted, recorded, filmed and made available to view in live and archive form via the Council's website. If you're seated in the public gallery, it is possible that the cameras may capture your image. If you wish to avoid being filmed, it's recommended you make a member of staff aware who can direct you where to sit. And the Westgate garden gates on the riverside are locked, so members of the public must leave the Guildhall by the side exit behind the glass door. That will be following the agenda that was sent out. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, John?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillors Baldock, Moses, Stockley and Watkins.
And do we have any substitutes?
We do. We have Councillor Prentice for Councillor Baldock, Councillor Carnack for Councillor Stockley and Councillor Jones for Councillor Watkins.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest by members or officers?
Nothing received in advance, Chair.
And any declarations of interest within the room from anyone? No? Lovely, thank you. Need to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March, which have gone out, and they can be agreed by general assent, please. Everyone's happy with those? Lovely, thank you. Right, we don't have any public speakers listed for tonight. So we move on to item 6, which is main business of the evening, which is the updates to the Constitution, which is on pages 12 to 22 of the agenda, and consider a report of Peter Davis, Joint Chief Executive. Matthew Archer is going to present the report tonight, so I'll hand over to him and he can do the introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. The report asks the committee to recommend Any better? Right. Hello, and I'll start again. Okay, so this is recommending a package of amendments, and the main one is around the forthcoming changes to the national planning legislation. The most significant change is around the national scheme of delegation for planning decisions, which will require specific categories of application to be determined by officers rather than by planning committee. And this represents a significant change from the Council's current local arrangements, particularly because the existing councillor call-in provisions will no longer be compatible with the national framework and therefore will need to be removed. The Constitution will need to set out the new referral process clearly, including the roles of the nominated officer and the nominated member, and these are new roles specified in the legislation, and the limited circumstances in which applications may still be referred to the planning committee. The proposed amendments are intended to provide a new, transparent and legally robust decision-making framework that's consistent across the country, therefore reducing the risk of procedural challenge or judicial review once the new regime comes into force. So the purpose for bringing this here today is really to give you as much warning as we can that these changes are upcoming and have to be implemented by the 31st of October. They're currently in the form of statutory guidance and regulation, and we expect the regulations to be formally laid and introduced any time in the next few weeks. The report also proposes changes to the Planning Committee terms of reference, the planning procedure rules, and the Code of Good Practice to ensure that they are all consistent with the national scheme. And in further changes, we will need to we're required to introduce clear procedures where the Planning Committee is minded to determine a major development proposal contrary to the officer recommendation, which could include deferral for a further report before final determination. The report also reflects the new requirement to consult the Secretary of State before refusing certain major housing applications of 150 or more dwellings. And I think in relation to the planning issue, that's probably as much as I need to say by way of introduction. We are still learning about this because the new statutory guidance was only published on the 1st of June, but we're happy to take questions today. What this will enable us to do by getting the steer from the Governance Committee and Council in July, we can then take away comments from this committee and then make sure that what we work up into the Constitution will comply with the guidance and legislation, but it also gives you advance warning of what's to come. In terms of the rest of the report, I understand we'll take the items one by one, but just by way of summary, the changes to the Renters' Right Act were introduced last year, and as a result of that, we need to grant new additions to the delegated powers of officers in order that they can exercise their rights to enter properties and maintain the inspection and enforcement regime that they are responsible for, making sure that tenants' rights are protected and that landlords are complying with the legislation that is required of them. So again, we've provided an outline there of the addition that we would make to the delegated powers, which is a very general one, and provided some detail below in terms of what those powers are actually designed to do. The third recommendation is partly a response to, or is mainly a response to local government reorganisation and the way that government is choosing to interact with us. Previously, the executive procedure rules were designed to assign responsibilities to portfolio holders quite generally, because most of the decision making that we did was very collective and collegiate. That is the culture of this organisation. However, within the Act, the powers do disseminate from the leader downwards, and it is useful and quite common to specify duties and responsibilities that are assigned specifically to the leader. And I think given what is happening with local government reorganisation and the fact that it's the leader who is often being written to by the minister and asked to respond on behalf of the council, it's helpful to add this to the executive, to part 6, the executive procedure rules, for the avoidance of any doubt, so that we have something very clear to point to. And recommendation 4 is complementary to that, insofar as the government, the minister and others are writing directly to the Joint Chief Executives and asking them to respond to requests for action, including the negotiations on the structural changes order. So we are adding a specific delegation there, again for the avoidance of any doubt, in response to the new requirements that have arisen due to local government reorganisation. And that's it by way of introduction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Right, so we're going to look at these items one at a time, just to make it easier to, and clearer to know what we're talking about. So we've got the five basic changes on there, and the first one is the changes to the planning functions. And a proposal from the chair on that is that the committee recommend to full council that the proposed amendments be approved to reflect the national scheme of delegation for planning functions, which is to be added to the constitution once the legislation takes effect. Do I have a seconder for that proposal, please?
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Prentice. We've all had a chance to look at it and read the details, so I'll open it up for debate. Anyone? Councillor Sol.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions. I'd be interested first. I mean, I understand this is government legislation and we haven't got much choice. But what would happen if council did not agree to this? You know, technically, what actually happens to the constitution if we didn't agree to this, either here today or when it comes to council? I think these. You know, we're not in Parliament, so I can't debate the detail of what's gone on here. But I'm really not happy with some of these things, losing the calling powers. And I think of an example I had last time I called something in, which was 2 or 3 years ago now, was solar panels on a roof in a village, where the officer had recommended refusal. And you know, it's not often you bring something to committee because you want it approved, but committee approved that. And from what I see here now, this is just going to be in that situation, it would be refused by officers, and there would be no opportunity for that to come to a committee. So I think that's really, you know, a real erosion of our democratic duties. When we have these categories, will as councillors and as members of the public, will people be informed which category something falls into? So it's pretty clear that, you know, your councillor cannot get involved in calling this in, or we will know whether it is an item that we can, you know, try to bring to committee by talking to the nominated officer and councillor. I think we need that needs to be really clear on planning applications, on the website, on notices that go up around the district. Yeah, so they're my questions, and I'd be pleased to get answers to those.
Do you want to take those, Jan, now?
Thank you, Chair. So if you didn't agree to it being added into the Constitution, it does place the council at risk of being challenged by judicial review, which of course can be very time consuming and expensive for the council to defend. So that's the key risk there. In relation to what is on the list as to where the decision will lie, was whether that's an officer or consideration will be taken as to whether to bring it to planning committee. I don't know if there's a requirement for it to be added onto the website and public notices, and whether there's any discretion. So that's one I'll take away, if that's okay, and look into that for you.
Do you want to add something, Matthew, to that?
I could do, yes. I think just to say it's a good idea to at least have flags so that councillors are clear. That there are a couple of tests that the nominated officer and the nominated member has to have a look at when deciding whether to refer something to planning committee. So there'll be some categories where they just have to go through the officer process, and some where there is some degree of discretion. And I think the bit that we need clarification on from probably from the head of service, once we get the final guidance and we understand sort of how it's going to be interpreted, is, you know, applications where referral is justified because the application raises issues of economic, social or environmental significance to the local area, or involves significant planning considerations having regard to the development plan or other material consideration. You know, that's the wording which I think leaves some scope for referral, but only through a very narrow window and process. So I think the intention is that that's done by exception, but how that is interpreted and applied, I think, is the bit that we need to understand a bit better between now and implementation.
Thank you.
May I
Thank you.
come back, Chair? May I just come back and clarify something on the, thank you, Chair, on the tier 1 and tier 2, are you saying then that that it won't be decided necessarily by an officer initially whether something, a householder wants to put an extension on their house? Now I read that that's going to be automatically decided by an officer. Are you saying there is some scope that by negotiation with someone that you could actually say, actually, we can move this out of that first stage into the second tier because there are reasons for it? Or is the opinion, no, I'm seeing heads being shaken. So what I need to know, if someone's going to put an extension on their house, it's going to be decided by an officer. Residents in a village contact me and say, we don't like that. I can say, sorry, I can't call that in. You've just got to make your objections. So residents need to know that that's the clear position. Thanks.
Yes, so there will be a whole selection of application types which have to be decided by officers. So ordinary householder applications, minor commercial development, minor residential development, all of those will be determined by officers under the new arrangements. It's the category such as major developments, which are subject to that review process. So I think in terms of your original interpretation that the majority would therefore go through the tier 1, as you put it, I think that's correct.
Thank you. It was Councillor Carnac and then Councillor Bland, please.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a couple of questions as well. I mean, I don't agree with this, and talking to my residents as well, they're very unhappy about this. They feel it silences their voice, and we were elected to represent them, and they've lost their representation on these issues. Like Councillor Sol, I've called in applications where they were grant refusal and the committee overturned that. Some of those have been in rural areas where the council has very strict policies on what you can and can't do, which has meant that we haven't just been left with derelict farm properties, but they've been able to be put to good use for industry or holiday lets. And I've also had others, the most recent being the Hoth solar plant, which did get refused. But I think in working with the officer and it being very clear to the officer that I was going to call that in, should it be moved to committee for agreement, that meant that the planning officers really did a huge amount of research into that application and looked at far more than I think they otherwise would have done. I'm also concerned that Chair of Planning is going to now have a huge job, because I can tell you, and talking to my colleagues in the Conservative Party, that whenever anyone contacts us and says, oh, my neighbour's doing this, can you come and have a look? I will be asking Chair of Planning to go and have a look, and I won't go anymore because there's absolutely no point in me going to have a look. But my question is, what consultation have we been involved with the government? What responses did we make to the consultation? And have we written to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government? In other words, what have we done to either try to amend this, agree this, or not disagree with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carnac. Are you able to address that question, Jan?
I don't actually know. Apologies on the top of my head. I'll have to have a look at that for you.
So can I come back on that then? Because in my opinion, we shouldn't be changing anything in our constitution until we've at least contacted the Secretary of State and asked them if there's any chance that there could be a reversal of this national scheme of delegation. And we wouldn't be alone in doing this, because I know a number of councils are also proposing to do this around the country. And I also think with the change of government from the end of next week, the likelihood is we're going to have a new Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government from the middle of July, who might take a very different view of this. And so I don't think we should be rushing this through when it's not till October the 31st, and we've got a council meeting in September, which would give us the summer to at least ask the new Secretary of State and at least be able to put our views in from this committee. So I would like to propose an amendment that to this recommendation, that we actually ask the chief executives and the leader to write to whoever the new, or if the Secretary of State continues, but whoever the new Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government is when appointed, urging reversal of the national scheme of delegation and restoration of local decision maker, and that we see what response we get before we go to our next meeting in September. And I think I probably have a seconder for that.
Thank you, Councillor Carnac. I think we'd have to look carefully at the wording of that, because it's not really an amendment to the proposal as it stands, is it? It's an alternative proposal.
Yes, that would be an alternative proposal to that part of the recommendation there, yeah.
Okay.
Or if it can be added in.
Okay, well, I'll have to open that up for discussion as well. Councillor Bland was next on the list.
Thank you. I'm not sure what I'm talking to at the moment. Am I talking to Rachel Carnat's proposal, or am I talking to what I was originally going to talk to? I mean, I can wrap them up together if that helps. So perhaps I'll do that. Let me say, first of all, I've got every sympathy with some of the points that Councillor Sole has been making in respect of members' use of call-in powers. I mean, I agree with him. I mean, I rarely use call-in powers myself, and when I do, it tends to be where I'm actually supporting an application rather than trying to stop one. And that's generally been supporting an application against an officer's likely or intended refusal. So there is an issue there. But on the whole, however, I mean, I do agree, and I'm going to say there is a point to the government's proposal here. And this might go contrary to Councillor Carnac's proposal. There is a point to it, and the point to it is simply this: we've got so many numbers of people who need housing, and yet particularly in London and the South East, out of all the regions of the country, our delivery on the housing delivery targets is the worst in the country. And some of the reason for that is going to be because of certain issues to do with, you can talk about Stodmarsh and all the rest of it, but some of the reason for that is because there are blockages being put in the way of reasonable planning applications for stuff. So I can understand the change that the government's trying to create here, which is to make the system more efficient and actually get what eventually happens, an approval for an application through, and get on with the housing delivery targets. So there is a point there that we have to bear in mind. It isn't just about people being unhappy with officers' decisions. It is that sometimes decisions just don't get made quick enough, well enough and good enough to actually deliver the housing delivery targets. And that's a crucial point that people need to understand about this particular change in the legislation. I do have a query, and it's a particular one that's been mentioned already, and I think Matthew's tried to deal with it, and that is around this issue about the way in which the designated officer and the designated member, i.e. Chair of Planning, can make a decision about whether something goes from category 1 into category 2. Because it seems to me the way this guidance is worded, and I think it is unclear, I have to say I do think it's very unclear, as to what are the kind of cases where that kind of decision making would have to be made. And I do actually think the result of that would be a huge amount of extra pressure on the Chair of Planning from members, and as Councillor Carnac is suggesting, members of the public would be doing the same, to answer these kinds of queries. And I'm not sure that's going to be helpful. So I do think we need a much clearer statement about the circumstances in which officer and designated member can make decisions to move something from category 1 to category 2. I understand why there's opposition to this. It's uncomfortable, but I can actually also see why we need to get on with this. And for those budding people that might like to get into planning generally, I can only imagine that there's going to be an increased number of jobs in the planning inspectorate, because you're bound to find more appeals going to the planning inspectorate than ever before.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bland. Councillor Ricketts, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I could support. I think the gist of Councillor Carnack's position is that we don't recommend to Council that we adopt Part 1, so that the first one, until we have written to the Secretary of State to ask if we can clarify this. I think that even those sort of speak in favour of this, it's really poorly worded. It's bad legislation. It's not completed. And I feel really uncomfortable adopting that before they've finished writing it. That's the first thing. I also don't think that it will achieve the stated goal. I mean, it's all well and good when people are disagreeing with you to roll the power back to the Secretary of State. But that's going to make them a lot busier, and it's also going to make the Chair of Planning a lot busier. I think this envisages Labour councils reporting to a Labour Secretary of State, but there's lots of councils up and down the country where the Chair of Planning isn't going to be minded to be the same as the Secretary of State. So it's going to cause a huge amount of issue. And I think one of the poorest piece of wording in here is where it says the member and the officer both have to agree. That's my reading of it. What happens when the Chair of Planning disagrees with the Head of Planning, which will definitely happen, even in a council where they're both, I mean, that happens all the time. And I just think we're storing up massive issues within the council for both the Chair of Planning and the Head of Planning within this, because people aren't going to stop complaining about planning applications. It's just where that goes and what happens. The Planning Committee is at the very least a pressure valve in those kind of situations. It makes a lot more sense for big applications in particular to be heard in front of a planning committee. The minute that's decided behind closed doors is the minute that people start to kick off. I mean, just on the basis of how badly drawn up and worded this is, and to Councillor Carnack's point of that we're likely to have a new Secretary of State who may come up with their own poorly worded legislation in the next couple of weeks. I think adopting this now when we have other council meetings in future, I'm not comfortable saying that we recommend to council to adopt this. And even if we thought that this would achieve the goal of somehow improving house building rather than just, you know, making it easier to land bank and trade the land, because we know it's not planning applications that are holding it up, it's developers saying it's not profitable to build. They've got 3 years to build, we've got 6 months to decide a planning application. The block in the system isn't with councillors. So I think this is, it's a really bad idea, it's bad policy, it's badly worded. I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending that this is put into our constitution. So I second whatever, if we can find a form of words, an amendment to say, I'm not comfortable putting this forward until we've at least made our views clear to the Secretary of State, whoever that may be.
Thank you, Councillor Ricketts. Yeah, Jane Guide would like to have a word then.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I don't know what our response is as a local authority on this. Public consultations have taken place. There was one in relation to the point about a referral to the Secretary of State in applications for over 150 dwellings. That took place between the 23rd of March and the 4th of May. And there was also a consultation on the wider aspects of this new proposed legislation. That was from the 26th of March to the 23rd of April. So consultations have actually taken place. There has been an opportunity to put those views in.
Can I ask, did we respond to either of those consultations?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to you, Councillor Carnac, but you've already spoken, so I'll take Councillor Jones first. And apologies, very, very kind of you, Councillor Jones. I'll take Councillor Prentice.
I was happy to wait, Chair, but you very kindly. I think I should probably declare an interest as the current Chair of Planning, which I think everyone's aware of. I'm obviously aware of the proposals, and obviously seeing this paper puts them into a little bit more detail. Yes, I think it would potentially require a tranche of extra work for the designated member, i.e. the Chair of Planning. I'd still see that as a democratic link between what other councillors would like to see happen when they want to call in an application, or that they're minded to call in an application, and the Chair of Planning and the Head of Planning ultimately make the decision. I think it's knowing what the pipeline is in the next few months. I think the committee is going to get busier, but I think it's also worth saying that it's possibly worth spending a little bit longer looking at this particular proposal to get it right, to get the wording right, and to get the to be really clear what the role of the local planning authority is. So I'm a bit open-minded on that at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few things really. Councillor Soul said I'm totally worried myself about the whole situation, and anyone or any policy which erodes our democracy, which I feel we've not been consulted on anyways. It's a difficult thing, particularly it's like all of us, when you go to see residents, I'm not having, or would not have, the ability to have that in your toolbox, so to speak, makes a big difference. You never go in there and say to a resident, oh, we can do this, we can do that. You listen, and if it's not going to happen, you have to be blunt. If that's no planning reasons, you can't call it in. That's always been my way. But when we do, I've been a councillor nearly for 8 years in 2 different terms. I think I've done 2 call-ins in that amount of time. So we manage that pretty well, but not to be able to even be bothered and to be treated in this manner, in my view, to just take that democracy away. And if it's blocking development, and Council Plan says we need to build houses, I get that. But, you don't use democracy as a tool to get rid of it. And the local residents feel we're here to represent them. We're having another chip of that knocked away. And an example of it, recently, a few of us are in here, we were on planning when we had the Littlebourne, I think, come through. It's a classic example of democracy. Today, that wouldn't happen. You'd be vetoed. You just have to vote for it, or you just wouldn't be allowed. This council, I was proud to be a part of that. At that time, we refused the application unanimously. So the people of Littlebourne can never turn around and say, well, the Cambridge City Council, our planning department, never stood up for us. We stood up for them for the right reason, not because it was the right, just because we wanted to. And yet we were ride roughshod over, and the government decided that, to actually deliver on that, and not us. But we didn't. That's democracy. That's what we're elected for. We're here to represent people, and we're having it eroded away for no particular reason I can see than the mere foundation of literally being a democratic country to have something else just chipped away from. What's the sense about that? What's the fear that it takes 6 more weeks for something to be built? The public already think that planning is something which goes on behind closed doors and they don't feel that they have a proper input on. This is yet again more fuel to put into that. And as a councillor, yeah, I don't want to do this. I think Councillor Prentice will be an excellent, and is an excellent chair of planning. But my gut reaction to is, okay, if that's how you want to treat me, when I get an application come through, I'll send it on. Because there's no point me going there and having I've been dealing cases like all of us here for weeks and months at sometimes, going back, seeing people. It's an emotional thing at times for people. And just to say, do you know what? You're not even going to have the right to do that. Even if you had a planning reason, then we have to fight our own team, so to speak, to get that to come to planning. Not happy about that at all. I think it's an absolute disgrace to have democracy taken away in that manner. And I would definitely say that we should wait because we'll get a new bod come in, I'm sure, and it may completely change everything and we won't be having this conversation. But I'm not happy about that at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. Point well made. Councillor Paget, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think many of the points about this change have been made, and I'm in agreement with Councillor Carnack's suggestion that we can't be sort of making the decision at this point, and we need to do more to make our voices heard. I have a bit of a different question based on a situation that I've been in myself, and previously as a councillor, if you were to put in an application on your own home, that was brought into planning committee automatically, and I just wondered under this new system whether that would now be going to an officer for making a decision, or whether that would still be going to a committee. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, we have raised that question, but Matthew will explain it.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's a very good question. It's one of the categories where it would be subject to the review between the nominated officer and the nominated member, is our understanding of it. So that would be one of the applications where, based on the merits of the application, it could be determined by officers or it would be referred to the committee. So that's a slight difference from where we are now, where matters are automatically referred, but that was our reading of the draft legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Forrester, please.
Thank you, Chair. This has been a really interesting debate, hearing everyone's views, and I do have sympathy for the views first proposed by Councillor Sole publicly earlier this week, kind of echoed. But why I have sympathy is because I think those may be the views of many members of the public and our residents, but I don't think they're necessarily justified in throwing out the whole regime. And why I say that is because I've been on planning committee, and we're very fortunate here to have excellent councillors who treat the system of the council and the planning system with respect and don't call in matters regularly, do so with great consideration and engagement with their residents. I'm not sure that's the case across the country. There are politicians of all different colours who behave in all different ways. Some may have a bin on their head, but you know, it doesn't mean that we can guarantee that what's happening across the country is as good as what's happening here. And I think, therefore, we have to look at the national picture when this is being brought in, albeit I recognise the localised concerns. And that takes me on to the reason I actually support Councillor Carnack's proposal to adjourn this and think about it a bit longer. And that's because I think there may be benefits, not least to things for residents moving through the system more swiftly, and it perhaps being clearer in the timescales and expectation of how the process will work. So however we go forward, I do think there needs to be an education piece, both, I mean this respectfully, for councillors, because there have been lots of questions raised here today that we haven't completely had answers to, and for residents as to what this would mean in practice, if it's your application or if it's a neighbour's that you have concerns about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forrester. I'll just take Councillor Smith and then I'll let Councillor Carnack have the last word.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just thought I'd remind people that the councillors of the process of the current planning committee, that if something goes against the officer's decision, then planning reasons must be given. So we already have a process where it's clearly looking at the process that we have and finding the reasons, valid reasons, as to why something is not gone with the officer's decision. That doesn't need to change, I don't think, and I'm very uncomfortable with that sort of change, regardless of the size of the development. I also think the national picture is not particularly what we're addressing here. It may be relevant in the wider context, but what we're addressing here is the local change. And I think the more local councils that do, as Councillor Carnac has suggested and proposed, will make the government think again that what they've done is a little too heavy-handed and they need to do it. I also agree with Councillor Forrester that education is useful and that the positives of any change need to be brought forward and made more prominent. You know, there's a constant clique in the media that the government's not very good at marketing what it does, and I think that needs to be addressed very, very clearly in this situation. If there are positives, they need to be shown and not just rammed through as something, you know, London is forcing the local regions to build lots of houses for no particular reason, which is essentially how a lot of people in this corner of the world will see it. Anyway, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Carnac.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on what Councillor Bland said and say that I don't think any of us are against housing being built for people that need housing, but when we're talking about extensions being built, that's not increasing housing for people. And often the call-ins, I mean, anything in the local plan or a big development has automatically come to the planning committee anyway. I'm not really aware of anyone ever particularly calling in something on the local plan because it would be coming to committee. The call-ins are normally of exactly that, which we're not going to have any view over now, are things like an extension that builds some great big trajectory across into someone else's garden. They often really do come down to helping residents fight battles that they feel their life is being ruined. Over the years, I can think of numerous examples of where it has been supporting the little person like us who has had a neighbour or someone in their village who's wanted to do something that just would have been awful, and at least we bring that into the public sphere, and often that person has then changed their plans as a result. And what worries me is that planning officers, as we've heard from Councillor Prentice, there's a very full slate of planning applications coming up. They often just don't have the time to look into all the detail, which often a ward councillor will look into on behalf of their residents or alongside a parish council. And it does concern me, the answer to Councillor Paget, because we've had a number of cases here, officers, we've had councillors who've been developers, housing developers themselves or with close relations, that there could be political sway there depending on who is running the council, who is in charge of planning. I think we changed our planning our constitution to ensure that all planning applications that any councillor or officer or close family were involved with came through this planning committee. And I think it's very dangerous that that won't be happening. I think it leaves us open to all sorts of queries. And I mean, we've had one in recent years, which I won't go into now. But, you know, I just think that's wrong, plain wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everybody. That's a really useful discussion tonight, and I think we're quite aligned in our thinking that the opportunity to call in, the right to call in planning applications is the bread and butter of councillors' work. And I know I've had at least 3 requests to call in applications in my ward of West Bay, which is not a very controversial planning area. We don't get any huge developments down there. And we all know our wards. We know the little nuances of the applications that may impact more on our residents. So to move it on, we'll take a vote on Rachel's proposal, which Matthew has come up with a wording to basically delay this till we've got more information. And Matthew will read that out, and then we'll take a vote on that, if you're happy with that wording.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm just wondering how to deal with this, because the legislation, if it comes into effect, you know, we will have to deal with that, and the monitoring officer has a delegation to make amendments to ensure that we comply with legislation and that we don't act in an ultra vires way. So we have to be mindful of that. I think to Councillor Carnack's proposal, I could suggest an additional recommendation to council that council consider whether, before the final wording is incorporated into the constitution on the 31st of October, the leader of the council should write to the minister requesting that the draft national scheme of delegation be reviewed again before final adoption. So you could vote to make that recommendation to council, which would then invite the wider debate from the whole of council then on whether they should be written to, whether we should write to the minister or not. To the substantive recommendation, which would then follow after you voted on that, if you accept that wording, I think you could, we can delay adoption, but we can't necessarily, I think to refuse to adopt, I think would be something a bit different. So I wonder whether, bearing in mind we don't have to actually incorporate the wording for a little while yet, if council were minded to support your amendment, I'm wondering if we defer the substantive recommendation, basically behind the scenes we'll have to be getting on with making sure that the constitution complies anyway. So it's whether you want to grant a formal approval now or whether you defer consideration, but deferring consideration for what? Because if the legislation comes in, we'll have to implement it anyway. So you could approve one, but make it subject to the council making a decision on whether it wants to write before we actually put anything into our constitution and receive the response back, if that would work. Sorry, which would mean procedurally you take a vote on the proposal that I've just read out, which I can read again if you want, and then you would take a second vote on the substantive.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Smith, you wanted to comment on that?
Actually, I think Matthew, on his very final words there, answered my question, because having a response back was the key wording that was missing from his initial reading, and that was what I was looking for. We need, I think, when it goes to final decision, we need the response to act on, or to know what we can and can't do.
Yeah, Councillor Forrester.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, I suppose, Councillor Carnack and Matthew the question that I understood it was that we want to defer all the decisions other than Councillor Carnack's proposal, so that there is a opportunity to write to the new Secretary of State and perhaps they consider the submissions before a decision was made, rather than the Constitution being worked up and it being added while a decision's made. That's not meaning that the officers should pause work and risk the council being ultra vires, but just that it wouldn't be formally adopted until such time as we had written. My question is then what Councillor Carnack's proposal would be if a response wasn't forthcoming within that time frame, because then if we hinge it on having to get a response and we don't get a response, I am concerned that the council falls into ultra vires and the legal risks, etc., costs that could be incurred. So I don't know if you thought about that.
No, I mean, that's a completely difficult thing to know, isn't it, if they don't respond? But I think also in that letter, we should include the questions that have been asked tonight about the elements of where this legislation is poorly written. And I mean, we don't need to say it's poorly written, but we need to have explanations of how this works. So I would hope that they would respond to that. But I agree with Councillor Forrest. I don't think we should be voting on the substantive. I mean, if you have to continue work, then you can continue work. But we have a meeting in September of council, so, and this isn't until the end of October. So we do have time. And I agree with also Councillor Smith's point that I think, and Councillor Forrester, that this would then give us time to actually put more in the public domain about these changes. I think we're being rushed through this, and I think our residents feel we're being rushed through this, and they're being rushed through this. As we heard, there was a very brief consultation at the end of April, beginning of May, and it's now only early July. I really think we need to do an educational comms piece as well. I agree on that goes out to residents to say how this works. So I don't see the rush to get this through council at the moment. Thank you. Otherwise, yes, I think that wording is fine if we can just flesh it out a bit more.
To defer it. Yeah. Okay. That was my understanding as well. I don't really want to get into endless discussions over this one as well. So I think we should put it to a vote. But you had put your hand up, Councillor Souls. The opportunity there.
Thank you. It's just a quick point. Adding it into the Constitution in many ways is a copy and paste. That's not the difficult thing. The difficult thing is actually how you interpret it within planning. And I don't see how officers can start drawing up the rules and how they're going to interpret this until we get much greater guidance. If you look at the first category, it talks about minor residential schemes. What is a minor residential scheme? 1 house, 2 house, 10 houses, 20 houses? Who decides what a minor residential scheme is? We need greater guidance, and officers need that, so they know how they're going to interpret this. So, a copy and paste into the Constitution is one thing, but we need a much more information to know actually how it's going to be interpreted. And I'd hope we would get that in some sort of reply, either from the Secretary of State or additional information before we choose to adopt this.
Thank you. Yes, it does all feel a bit rushed. So I think we'll take a vote on the proposal to defer it and not on the substantive motion. So we will actually delay it, and then if we have to come back here and battle through it again, we'll have to do that. So we've got the wording there. If you can set that up, John, to vote. Do you want to just read that out again, Matthew? The new part.
Yes, I was just wondering whether we could wrap in the deferment as well. But the proposal was that council consider whether before. All right. The council consider whether before the final wording is incorporated into the Constitution on the 31st of October, the leader of the council should write to the minister requesting that the draft national scheme of delegation be reviewed again before final adoption. So whether you want to say reviewed again or further clarification provided before final adoption. Okay.
We'll put that to the vote then, John. Thank you.
Okay, that has carried. 9 in favour, 1 against and 1 abstained.
We got there. Thanks very much, everybody, for all your input. That was the best solution in the end that we've reached. We move on to the number 2, the delegation for the Director of People, which is the case we've all forgotten now, because a while ago was about the Renters' Rights Bill and the changes to our the requirement to enforce legislation there. So the proposed changes, so the proposal from the chair again is that we change the wording of the constitution to add for the delegation to Director of People to enter premises and to exercise all the council's statutory powers and duties in relation to private rented sector regulation and enforcement under the Housing Act 1988, the Renters' Rights Act 2025, and any regulations or subordinate legislation made under those acts. And do I have a seconder for that proposal for those changes, please? Councillor Forrester, seconding that. Thank you. Don't think we need any more explanation on that. If you're all happy, we'll open that up to discussion again, please. Anybody got any thoughts on it? No, okay. That's, you talked out tonight, so that's yeah. Yep. Happy to put that to a vote then, that we adopt that proposal.
And that is carried unanimously.
Well done, thank you. And the third item was the proposal that the duties and responsibilities of the leader be added to Part 6 of the Constitution as described in the report. And have a seconder again for that proposal. Councillor Forrester, thank you. Anybody have any comments that they want to make for that, or any questions? No. Excellent. We'll put that one to the vote again then, please.
And that's carried unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to number 4 is that we recommend to full council that the following delegations to the Joint Chief Executives be added to support the council's response to local government reorganisation. Won't read it all through because you've got that in front of you and you've seen it there. So do we have any comments or discussion on that? No, lot of all happy with that wording then, so we'll put that one to the vote for that recommendation, please.
That's carried unanimously.
Thank you. And the last recommendation proposed to full council that the monitoring officer be authorised to make any consequential or minor drafting changes required to give full effect to these recommendations. And I get a seconder. Councillor Forrester, thank you. Any questions? We'll put that to the vote then. Thank you.
And that's carried unanimously as well.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Wish we did get through them all as quickly as that. Agenda item 7 is the date of the next meeting, which is Tuesday, the 9th of March at 7 p.m, unless we have to have another emergency meeting beforehand. Item 8. Any other urgent business to be dealt with in public? Don't think we have anything. No, and don't think we have anything that we need to exclude the press and public for. No, and we don't have any other urgent business which falls under the exempt provisions of the Local Government Act 1972. No. Fantastic. We'll close the meeting there and we can all get off and get some fresh air. It's closed at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody. That was very useful, very interesting. Thank you.